now, folks, today we're taking a look at Drakk Manor, which is the second big expansion for Super Dungeon Explorer, which is a great game, one of my favorites. Now, first thing I'll say is, much like with the first big expansion, Roxor's Cavern, you do not need to assemble any of the miniatures in this expansion, which is a good thing if you're one of the people that had, like me, who had to assemble all the miniatures from the base game. But moving on from that, the theme of this expansion is basically a horror video game. Every Super Dungeon Explorer element is based on video games in some roundabout way. This one definitely pays a lot of homage to Castlevania. You're trying to defeat the evil Dracula-type character Von Drakk and all of the hordes of his evil minions, and technically you're supposed to be in his manor, I guess, hence the name, but of course there's no new tiles for Super Dungeon Explorer, so you're going through the same lava caverns and crystal caverns that you were before. But I digress. The new monsters in this game, you have undead like skeletons and necromancers and death knights, and the mini boss of the game is this Grim Reaper type character. There's another spawn point that brings out witches and giant spiders and bats, and the main boss, Von Drakk, is a vampire who can change forms into a monstrous form. And of course, you have new heroes, of course, to go adventuring against the evil Von Drakk. You have a holy sister, like a nun. You have an angel, and you have a Simon Belmont type character who can actually transform into a werewolf. So lots of cool stuff in this game. Let's go through the overview. I'll show you all the different components, walk through a little bit of it without actually going into the rules of the main game. Then we'll come back and I'll tell you what I think about all of it. Okay, so I'm not going to go over all the rules of Super Dungeon Explorer. If you want to know more about the game, you can check out my review or find the rulebook online. Instead, I just want to show you all the new stuff that comes in the Von Drakk Manor expansion. Now, obviously, this is based on sort of a haunted house, Dracula horror type theme, so you can expect a lot of Castlevania references since, of course, Super Dungeon Explorer is supposed to be an homage to video games. So first, there's a couple of new rules that come in the game, and you have this little rules addendum card that will explain them a little bit. You have a new status effect called Vulnerable, which makes you discard your highest die when you're defending, but also offensive potions, of which you actually have new little tokens to represent these types of potions. These are going to be used by both the good guys and the bad guys to, instead of healing and giving buffing effects, are going to debuff and hurt whoever your opponent is, whether you're the good or the bad guy. There's also another new type of token, which are these bone piles, which are used specifically for some of the different monsters. Basically, when a certain type of monster, the skeletons, get killed, they leave these bone piles and they could be resurrected later. So that's the only new types of tokens in the game. Let's go to what you all came here to see, which is the new heroes first amongst all the other miniatures. So like I said, these are based more off of like horror and Castlevania type themes. So one is you have this nun girl who's called the Sister of Light. Here's her miniature, and I just dropped her on the ground, and here is her card. So she has some pretty decent stats. She has abilities like Hammer of Judgment, which does force movement effects, and purification, elixir of light, all the types of things that you would expect a nun to do. Then you have the Celestial Herald, who is like an angel type character, which is a really, really cool miniature. They do, as always, they do a really good job on these miniatures at Soda Pop. And here's her card. She obviously has some ranged attacks. She has a little bit of buffing and some pretty decent stats overall. But probably the centerpiece hero of this game is Von Wilding, who is obviously an homage to Samus Aran? No, Simon Belmont, sorry. Who, complete with Whip, lots of really cool abilities, including here's some of those offensive potions like Holy Water and Holy Oil, and so on. But the main reason he is so cool, here's his miniature, by the way, another really cool miniature, is that he can turn into a werewolf. In this case, his name becomes Von Wilder. Really good detail on that. Sort of blows the druid's angry bear out of the water. And here's a card for Von Wilder. Has some really nasty abilities, including a sweeping attack that hits like the entire front row of enemies and deals damage. Lots and lots of movement. So really, really overpowered in my personal opinion. Now, on to the monsters, and we'll start with the different monster groups. First, you have these new spawn points called Shallow Graves, of which there are 2 of them in the game. And Shallow Graves are going to let you bring out Dust Coven Necromancers, Dread Knights, Dust Mages, Boneheads, and Rattlebones. And ooh, this reminds me. Now, I'll mention this in probably in my outro as well, but there is a typo on these cards and also on the box if you have the first edition printing of Von Drakk Manor. There are only supposed to be 4 of the Rattlebones, and then on one of the other cards for the other type of spawn point, there's only supposed to be 4 Skull Bats here. So just make a note of that. Me and a lot of other people freaked out when we first saw that number and realized we didn't actually have that many miniatures, but it's just a misprint. Don't freak out too much. So you have the Shallow Grave, and here's the different things that come out. You have the Boneheads, and we'll do this in no particular order, who are these guys here, who are sort of like the grunts, like the kobolds of the group. Then you have these really cool miniatures, which are the Dread Knights, which are sort of the tanks, a good attack, defense, a cursed blade, which inflicts the fragile status. You have the Dust Coven Necromancer. I realize I'm doing these completely out of order. Card first, miniature first, whatever. But the Dust Coven Necromancer is here. Lots of really good detail on these minis when you really think about it. Then you have the 2 Dust Mages, also very cool. And they also have the raise ability. I think the Dust Coven Necromancer obviously has that as well, and that's the ability I was talking about that's going to take these Rattlebones here, which I'll talk about now, and after they're destroyed, actually raise them back up and bring them back, which is sort of okay because they're really, really weak, but it's just going to get really annoying for the heroes as they continuously come back and come back over and over again. So, I just knocked over the big boss. Never mind. But that's it for that type of spawn point. Now, the other type of spawn point is the Pumpkin Patch. And this is sort of like how in the base game you had one type of spawn point that put out a lot of like sort of weaker enemies, and then another type of spawn point that put out stronger enemies, but there was only one of those spawn points and there's less of those types of enemies. And that's kind of what the Pumpkin Patch is. So you have the Crypt Spider, the Curse Coven Witches, and the Skull Bats. The Crypt Spider is just one of the most impressive miniatures in this game. Calling it a miniature together with the other 2 over there, the big ones, sort of an insult to the miniature, but it's super duper cool. And getting this out on the first turn is really going to intimidate the heroes. That's just one of them, and there's its card, which makes it look even more intimidating. It's got some really nasty abilities, like its Silk Spinner spraying out webs and so on. The Cursed Coven Witches are one of the cuter miniature enemies. Looks like they should almost be heroes, but there they are. You should really, really be careful with these minis because this one is always bending and looks like it almost might break. But you've got 2 of those, and together with them, they actually have an offensive potion called Transmogrify, which can turn another model into a miserable toad, including the heroes. So here's the miserable toad miniatures, which actually might be one of my favorites from the set, despite how unimpressive it looks. But even if you're turned into a toad, you actually do have a decent attack that can steal potions or hearts, actually, even though its stats are not all that great. And then finally, for this type of spawn point, which this is the Pumpkin Patch, by the way, which looks really cool, you have the Skull Bats, which are probably one of the most ubiquitous enemies over the course of so many different types of video game and tabletop RPGs. But there's a Skull Bat. They're just really, really irritating little stinging things. Now on to the biggest, baddest models in the Von Drakk Manor expansion. We'll start with the mini-boss of the game, who is the Death Spectre, who not only has one of the most impressive miniatures in all of Super Dungeon Explorer, most miniature games combined, but has some really nasty abilities. Here's his card. He has very slow movement. Obviously, he's only got 1 move, as you can see, but he has Ghost Form, which lets him essentially teleport anywhere that he can see. To any empty square within 10 squares in line of sight of the current square. So even 10 squares is a lot of movement for just spending 1 point. And his ability is Life Sap, which lets him just automatically give a model a wound. Just automatically, no roll. And then he immediately heals. So he is definitely one of the nastiest mini-bosses I've ever seen. But, of course, the mini-boss is supposed to be nothing compared to the main boss of the game, and that is Von Drakk, the titular villain of this expansion. Now, this is Von Drakk's model. He doesn't look that nasty or impressive. Some of the hero models actually look more intimidating, but he does have some good stats. High movement of 8. He can do Ghostly Vigor, which gives all undead +1. So if there's still a lot of enemies on the board using this expansion, you might be in a lot of trouble. Tide of Bones, which also lets him raise all the rattle bones back to life. And that first ability there is Shapeshift. Well, what does that mean? Well, he becomes this nasty, intimidating thing, this man-bat type creature, which also has its own card and is very, very powerful. Same movement, a ridiculously high attack, two automatic damage, 2 red dice, 2 blue dice, a terrifying screech which can stun the heroes, just really nasty. If you need to, you can even switch back to his other form. And of course, he comes with the explanation of all of his different special abilities and the dungeon effects. So really nasty character. Of course, because it is, as with all bosses, you're going to get special treasure like the Cursed Talisman. Remember, you can only use these if you're using Von Drakk in the deck, unless you just want to break the rules. I mean, sure, why not? Just throw all the treasure together. But it's a curse item that must be immediately equipped, cannot be discarded, and you have to discard your highest attack roll whenever you attack. The Batwing key increases your dex and gives you luck, which means you can take potions instead of hearts or vice versa. The Mournful Vial lets you use it to gain immunity to status effects and +1 to will. The Bewitched Hand gives you cold, vulnerable, fire, and will +1. The Withered Ring is actually pretty cool because it's going to essentially let you discard it to resurrect one of the heroes, or any model really. And Possessed Cloak, which gets you give a special ability to confuse in a wave, and also increases your attack +2. So really good equipment. That's basically Von Drakk Manor. Lots of really cool models, lots of new ways to play and enjoy the game. Let's get back to my final opinion. This is, of the 2 big expansions for Super Dungeon Explorer, and even counting the smaller, like little mini boss expansions, this is my favorite. There's just so much goodness in this box. I don't think either of the monster tribes in this expansion are as interesting as the Rock Top Gang from Roxor's Cavern, which is just so cool, those turtles. But nevertheless, there's just a lot of cool stuff here. Again, all the miniatures are awesome. You don't have to put them together, and the sculpts are just amazing. Every one of them looks cool to some degree or another. We'll probably never complain about any of the sculpts or miniatures from Super Dungeon Explorer as long as I don't have to put them together. I'm sorry to keep harping on that, but so no problems there. Now, I'm just going to point out the biggest problem that I have with this, and it's something that I sort of glossed over with Roxor's Cavern because that was just the first big expansion, and okay, there were still some similar themes with that in the base game, because the base game you have a dragon going, so you're going through lava caverns and you're fighting kobolds and dragon whelps. Okay, then you move on to, the turtles and the Fireflow denizens. It makes sense they'd all be in the same location. This one is supposed to be in a haunted house. There's no new tiles. Why? Unless I want to homebrew my own tiles or take someone else's homebrew tiles that they've done online and paste them out on boards, or buy one of those really expensive 3D sets, you're going through the same tiles. Why are there no new tiles? It is the one thing this game needs the most, and the game has been out for years now, and there's still no new dungeon tiles. I really, really, really hope they rectify that. I want to give you my money for these tiles. Why won't you take my money, Soda Pop Miniatures, and produce new tiles? Anyways, that's probably my biggest problem with all of the expansions so far, is there's no new tiles. Let's move on from that and just talk about what's in the box. So you have 2 new tribes, I like to call them, of enemies. You have the undead tribe that comes out of the shallow graves, which are all the skeletons and death knights and necromancers and things like that. By far my least interesting of this game, just because, okay, it's undead, I get it. I think the death knights are super cool, but I kind of think that the rattle bones and constantly bringing them back and raising them back is sort of too fiddly, but it's an interesting way to play the game. It's definitely a different way to play as opposed to the other expansions, so I appreciate the variability in that. The pumpkin patch enemies, though, that tribe of enemies are a little more interesting. You have the Dust Coven witches who can turn characters into frogs, which actually happened in a couple of games that we played, which was super cool. I love those little frog miniatures, and it's no one likes getting turned into a frog. It's just like, as soon as once that happened for the first time and the witches popped out, heroes were just booking it away from those witches. Like, no, I don't want to fight that witch. Just get to turn me into a frog. So that's a super cool thing. The giant spider. First time we ever played with this expansion, brought the giant spider in the first round. And players were like, whenever I get new stuff for Super Dungeon Explorer, I don't show the players. I'm always the overlord. I'm always the console. I just got used to it. But I never show the players the new miniatures that I have. So I plop down this giant spider on the first round. They're like, the mini boss already? No. That's just a giant spider that you have to kill. So that's super cool. So I definitely, I always like one of the enemy troops more, and this one is the pumpkin patch enemies for sure. Except for the bats, whatever. The main bosses and the mini boss. The mini boss, the Grim Spectre, coolest mini boss so far. By far. Not just because he looks ridiculously cool. Definitely like my top 5 sculpts of the entire game. But the fact, I mean, his special abilities, that he can teleport, that he can just do this death touch thing, that is so thematic. If you've ever, and it's even more thematic if you're someone that's played D&D and you've had to fight a wraith or a ghost. That's how they function. So nasty, so cool, awesome mini boss. I'll probably, even if I'm using other sets of monsters, I'd probably still use him as a mini boss. He's so cool. Von Drakk, also very cool. The ability to transform into the giant bat, but also the ability to transform back and have different capabilities. He's ridiculously powerful as the bat with his attack dice. Getting the auto hit plus rolling more dice. I mean, just really, really tough, but also very thematic. I like that. He's this little chibi vampire kid, and then he transforms into this giant bat. I don't even know if he's a kid. All the characters look like little kids to me. They might be supposed to be adults. I don't know. But anyways, very, very cool monster. Definitely better than Roxor. I have a fondness for dragons, so maybe Starfire is better, but I think Von Drakk could potentially be the best of the bosses. I don't know. So definitely happy there. And I'm happy with the heroes as well. I thought the heroes from Roxor's Cavern were just okay. I actually thought some of the heroes from the base set were much better than those heroes. But I love the heroes from this one because they're all very, very thematic and tie in very well with this expansion. You've got the angel and the nun, who remind me of a lot of different anime characters who are trying to fight back and use their holy powers. And they're not just, heal bots or buffers in the party. They do really good damage, and they're really good. I like using them going through the battles, or I should say seeing other players use them, because I'm very rarely on the playing side of this. I'm usually the console. But by far the coolest one, and another fault of the game of mine, is the expansion, is the Von Wilding. Now, he's one of the coolest heroes that there is. He looks cool. His abilities are cool. The fact that he transformed into this werewolf with this awesome ability is cool. But that's kind of the problem. I would say he's probably the most overpowered hero that I've seen used or played as. And that's fine. I mean, it's very, very cool, but I kind of wish they depowered him a little bit, because now, the last couple of games we played, everyone clamored to be, people had to flip a coin to see who would get to play as Von Wilding, because that's how cool and powerful he is, and every hero wants to feel powerful, even though it's supposed to be a cooperative game, and everyone's working together anyways, but I get that. But regardless, I like this game because of its theme, the game as a whole, and Von Drakk delivers that thematic feeling in spades. I wish there was new tiles. I wish the game was still a little more balanced, but man, there's so much in this box. There's so much cool stuff. It adds more and more and more to the game, and it just exaggerates the things that I like about the game the most, rather than taking away from them at all, other than the tile thing. And Soda Pop can keep this up. Keep releasing more and more of the stuff that I love, and I will continue to try throwing my money and my credit card at the screen. That's just how it's going to be. So, Von Drakk Manor, my highest recommendation, if you like Super Dungeon Explorer. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.